1177 BC. Why 5 empires vanished in one generation? This is the story of the Bronze Age collapse. Not a single war. Not one enemy. A cascade of disasters that swept away the first globalized world. Welcome to The Past Breathes. Today, we go back 3,000 years. To understand what happened, you first have to understand how interconnected this world really was. And why that interconnection became its greatest weakness. The Late Bronze Age, roughly 1700 to 1200 BC. This was a time of globalization before globalization had a name. As archaeologist Eric Cline puts it, this was a time where people were basically globalized around the Mediterranean in a way that is not frequently seen. In other words, they had what modern network scientists call a small world network. Everyone was within 2 or 3 hops of everyone else, just like us today. Egypt, the Hittites, Mycenaean Greece, Cyprus, Canaan. They traded, married, and wrote to each other across thousands of kilometers. Cline calls them the ancient G8. 8 powers connected by trade, diplomacy, and marriage. But here is what makes the story truly surprising. None of them were self-sufficient. Egypt supplied gold. Cyprus provided copper. Tin came all the way from Afghanistan, 3,000 kilometers away. You need both copper and tin to make bronze, the technology that gave the era its name. If the trade routes were cut, you could not make bronze. And without bronze, you were in real trouble. And that is exactly what happened. Around 1200 BC, the trade routes began to fail. Ships stopped sailing. Letters stopped arriving. And one by one, the empires started to fall. Around 1200 BC, the collapse began. Mycenaean palaces burned. The Hittite capital, Hattusa, was abandoned. Ugarit, a major port on the Syrian coast, destroyed so completely that it was abandoned for 400 years. Archaeologists found a tablet there. Its final message: the enemy is advancing. We have no army. Send help. Only Egypt survived. But barely. Egyptian records name the invaders the Peleset, the Shekelesh, the Shardana, the Weshesh, the Sea Peoples. For more than a century, historians treated the Sea Peoples as the sole villains of this story. Invaders who swept out of nowhere and burned everything in their path. But that explanation has always had a problem. But who were they? No one took credit. No one left a homeland behind. As Cline says, they are one of history's greatest scapegoats. For decades, historians blamed the Sea Peoples. But the truth is more complex. Because when you look at the evidence closely, the Sea Peoples do not look like a coordinated army. They do not have a homeland. They do not even have a clear leader. Cline calls it a perfect storm. Multiple disasters striking at once. First, a mega drought lasting 150 to 300 years. Pollen samples. Stalagmites. Dried up lake beds. The evidence is overwhelming. Second, famine. Clay tablets from Ugarit and the Hittite capital beg for grain. One Hittite king wrote to Egypt, "I am starving to death. Please send grain. It is a matter of life and death." Egypt sent supplies. But it was not enough. Third, earthquakes. Between 1225 and 1175 BC, a seismic storm shook the entire region. And fourth, invaders. The Sea Peoples were real. But Cline argues they were as much victims as oppressors. Migrants fleeing drought and hunger. Not a mastermind army. None of the great civilizations were self-sufficient. They needed each other. Cline writes, this globalized network is what rose them up to the highest levels. And what brought them crashing down. A system's collapse. And once it started, there was no stopping it. This is what makes the Bronze Age collapse so frightening to historians. It was not caused by a single catastrophe. It was a trap. A system so tightly connected that it could not survive the loss of even a few of its parts. Not everyone disappeared. Egypt muddled through. Weakened. But alive. Egypt survived not because it was stronger, but because it was luckier. The Nile gave it food when other lands starved. And the desert gave it protection when other cities burned. The Cypriots and Phoenicians did not just survive. They flourished. The Cypriots pioneered iron weapons. The Phoenicians standardized the alphabet. The ancestor of the letters I am speaking right now. The Assyrians and Babylonians adapted. Water from the Tigris and Euphrates made them resilient. But the Hittites? Gone. Their capital abandoned. Their language forgotten. As Cline puts it bluntly, don't be a Hittite. The Hittites had no major river like the Nile or the Tigris. When the drought came, they had no backup. When the famine came, their enemies smelled weakness. And when the earthquakes hit their capital, there was no one left to rebuild. This is not just ancient history. Climate change. Supply chain disruptions. Migration. Inequality. A globalized world where one ship, stuck in a canal, can affect everyone. He asks, are we going to be fragile? Or anti-fragile? Are we going to be the Phoenicians? Or the Mycenaeans? History does not repeat, Cline says. But it rhymes. Cline ends his book with 7 common-sense lessons from the Bronze Age collapse. Have backup plans. Keep the working-class content. Prepare for extreme weather. Protect your water. Be innovative. The Iron Age gave us iron and the alphabet because people were forced to adapt. And most of all, do not assume we are too big to fail. The Egyptians believed their empire would last forever. The Hittites believed their walls would never fall. The Mycenaeans believed their kings were protected by gods. They were all wrong. Before the collapse, the Mediterranean was a different world. Great cities lined the coasts. Palaces towered over the plains. Kings ruled from Egypt to Anatolia. Trade ships carried copper, tin, gold, and silver. Diplomats traveled for months to deliver clay letters. This was the age of heroes. The age of King Tut. The age of the Trojan War. And then, in just a few decades, it all disappeared. Egypt was the superpower of its time. Its pharaohs built temples that still stand today. Its armies controlled lands from Sudan to Syria. Egyptian gold was the currency of the Bronze Age. But Egypt was also overstretched. Too many borders to guard. Too many enemies to watch. When the drought came, when the famine struck, when the invaders appeared at the delta, Egypt almost fell. Almost. But the Nile saved them. Every year, the river flooded. Every year, it brought new soil. Egypt could feed its people when others could not. That is why they survived. The Hittites were different. Their empire was built on iron and war chariots. Their capital, Hattusa, was a fortress of stone. But Hattusa was far from the sea. Far from the great rivers. When the drought came, the Hittite fields turned to dust. When the famine came, their enemies attacked from all sides. The Hittite king begged for grain. He begged for help. But no help came. Within a generation, the Hittite empire was gone. Not conquered. Not destroyed. just abandoned. In Greece, the Mycenaeans built palaces on hilltops. They covered their walls with bronze and their kings with gold. They fought at Troy. They sailed to Egypt. They were traders, warriors, and builders. But their kingdoms were small. Their fields were poor. When the drought came, the Mycenaeans starved. When the earthquakes came, their palaces collapsed. When the invaders came from the sea, there was no army left to fight. The great age of Mycenaean Greece ended in fire and ash. Homer wrote about their heroes. But he wrote 400 years later. Cyprus and Phoenicia were different. They were not great empires. They were not ruled by powerful kings. They were traders. Their cities were built on the coast. Their fleets controlled the sea. When the Bronze Age collapsed, the great empires fell. But the traders survived. They adapted. The Cypriots learned to make iron. The Phoenicians invented the alphabet. They spread their letters across the Mediterranean. Greek, Latin, English, all come from Phoenician scribes. The traders did not just survive the collapse. They built the next world. Further east, two empires survived: Assyria and Babylonia. They had the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. They had good land. They had strong kings. When the drought came, the rivers still flowed. When the famine came, the fields still produced. The Assyrians and Babylonians did not need to trade for food. They did not need to beg for grain. They pulled back from the world. They waited. And when the chaos ended, they returned. They rebuilt their cities. They rewrote their laws. They became the new superpowers of the Iron Age. In 2026, archaeologists made a stunning discovery: DNA from ancient graves in the southern Levant. The bones belong to the Paleset, one of the Sea Peoples. The results were shocking. The Paleset were not from the Western Mediterranean. They were from Greece, from Crete, from Anatolia. The Sea Peoples were not outsiders. They were refugees, fleeing their own collapsing homelands, searching for food, searching for safety. They were not an invading army. They were the first climate migrants in history. New satellite data confirms the ancient drought. Scientists analyzed tree rings from Anatolia to Iran. They studied pollen from lake beds. They mapped ancient river routes from space. The results are clear. Between 1250 and 1100 BC, the entire eastern Mediterranean dried up. Rainfall dropped by 30%. Crops failed for decades. Villages emptied. Cities starved. The mega drought was real. It lasted 300 years. And it was the trigger for everything that followed. Why did the system collapse so fast? Because it was too connected. When Cyprus stopped sending copper, Greece could not make bronze. When Afghanistan stopped sending tin, Egypt could not make bronze. When the trade routes died, everyone died. No single empire could survive alone. They had all become dependent on each other. That is the danger of globalization. It makes you strong, but it also makes you fragile. One broken link, one failed harvest, one ship that never arrives, and the whole network comes down. The first lesson from the Bronze Age collapse is simple. Do not build your civilization on one river, one crop, one trade route. The Hittites had no backup plan. When their fields failed, they had no food. When their enemies attacked, they had no allies. When their capital fell, there was no second capital. The Egyptians survived because they had the Nile. The Assyrians survived because they had 2 rivers. The Hittites had nothing, and they paid the price. The second lesson is about adaptation. The Mycenaeans were strong. They had the best weapons, the best armor, the best forts, but they could not adapt. When bronze became scarce, they did not switch to iron. When the trade routes failed, they did not find new partners. They tried to fight the old wars with old weapons, and they lost. The Cypriots and Phoenicians had no great armies, no great walls, but they adapted. They switched to iron. They invented new ships. They found new markets. They did not fight the collapse. They surfed it. The third lesson is about preparation. The Bronze Age kingdoms did not prepare for disaster. They did not store grain for 7 years, like Joseph in Egypt. They did not build backup water supplies. They did not train their people for famine. When the drought came, they were caught off guard. When the earthquakes came, their buildings collapsed. When the invaders came, their armies were already starving. Today, we have the same problem. Our supply chains are fragile. Our cities are vulnerable. Our climate is changing. We need to prepare. Not for a war. Not for a recession. For a perfect storm. The fourth lesson is about warnings. The Bronze Age kingdoms had many warnings. Clay tablets from Ugarit say, "Famine is here. Send help." Letters from Hittite kings say, "We are starving. Please send grain." But the warnings were ignored. Egypt did not send enough grain. The trade routes did not reopen. The kings did not change their policies. They thought the system was too big to fail. They were wrong. Today, we also have warnings. Climate scientists tell us the planet is warming. Economists tell us the system is fragile. Leaders tell us everything is fine. Are we listening? Or will we be like the Hittites, ignoring the signs until it is too late? The Bronze Age collapse was not the end of history. It was the end of a world. But from the ashes, new civilizations rose. The Greeks, the Romans, the Phoenicians. They learned from the past. They built new systems, new laws, new alphabets. Today, we face our own perfect storm. Climate change, pandemics, wars, economic crises. We can be the Hittites. Blind, rigid, doomed to fall. Or we can be the Phoenicians. Adaptable, innovative, ready to build something new. The past breathes. The question is, will we listen? The past breathes. Subscribe. In the next video, who were the Sea Peoples really? New DNA evidence from 2026. See you next time.